Hi everyone, I'm Christine, this is Köken. We both agreed that we want to talk about two major subjects actually. One is how come we both end up in a table conversation in the Congress on religiosity and the city. And the other is really how are we doing what we're doing and why. So we want to talk about methods and techniques of doing and of being immersed in our research.
Personal methods, let's say.
Personal methods.
Personal issues. Yeah.
Personal issues, exactly. So I get to ask the first question.
Okay.
Köken, you're a very, very successful artist, and I want to start by not asking you about your film work right now, but perhaps about the scientific trajectory that you've started recently with a PhD thesis on something that you call rituals of isolation, and it's all about Turkish weddings in Berlin. I want to ask you, why do we need another piece of work on immigrant communities and isolation in Berlin? Have you not heard enough about parallel societies?
It's true. I actually didn't know about this big vocabulary, let's say, bibliography on this subject. It was very intuitive to start on the subject, because maybe we can talk about intuition later. But when I first came to Germany, it was for an artist residency, and they put me in basically a village. But I said yes, of course. It was in Bremen, it's called a village called Worpswede, and these facilities where they give the artist 9 months of some money, and it was good for me to escape from Istanbul at that time, and I said yes to it. And then after I said yes, I said, this is great, but what do I do, And it was my first time in Germany, and I was wondering, what can I produce here? We have no cultural relationships, actually, in our culture with Germany, other than that the influx of Turkish guest workers coming here. It's not the Balkans, or it's not the Arab world. It's very far away from Turkey. So I was lucky enough to realize quickly that I should actually work on something that is close to my culture still. So I was occasionally going to Berlin, and I was seeing, of course, the Turkish community and the Kurdish community would pop up immediately. I realized how interesting that culture was. And I think I first started to have an idea to do about funeral services. Because the way that Muslims would be buried is different from how Christians are buried. And I heard the stories of how actually in every Turkish Airlines flight that you take from Berlin to Istanbul, there is a coffin.
Really?
Some of them. And it was very interesting. And then I visited some funeral houses, and the way they were washing the dead and everything. I was like, but this is a depressing topic, I thought. And then one day I saw one of these magazines of the Turkish community, and I found out that the weddings have been very important. For example, if you look at magazines, at the back it's always this paparazzi pictures, the socialites, for example. In every Turkish magazine that is published in Berlin, the photographs of weddings or shot at weddings are very important, and the Werbungs, the advertisements, were like half of the advertisements were coming in relation to the wedding industry. So I went to a friend, and I said, how can I get in touch with the people who are making weddings? Because I know a little bit, like, you can't just go to a wedding. They will welcome you, but it would be better to make an entrance. So my methodology, let's say, at that time I didn't have a methodology, but was to find a network of people who would know people. And at that time there was a station called TD1, which was making a program about weddings. So I found them, I don't know how, I met them, and they said, okay, you can come. And I said, I'm going to have a camera with me. If you want, I can give you my material. They didn't even want anything from me, because they looked at my footage the first evening. They said, your footage is really not useful for us. It's not good enough. And I said, okay, can I still come? They said yes. So we went to the first wedding. And I started as an art project. I wanted to make an art project because they invited me. They're giving me a stipendium, a monthly money. But the minute I walked into the wedding room, I was very hit by the energy. It was very, very interesting for me to see this. First of all, it was in closed doors. Yeah, it was isolation immediately started there. I saw that this is a big party happening here. And at that time, I was going clubbing a lot, so I used to compare that the energy of the wedding which is on a Saturday night with the energy of, let's say, the biggest club in Berlin, Berghain or Panorama. And I was very drawn into the energy, and I kept on shooting, but I could have stopped shooting, but for 6 months every weekend I was going to another person's wedding with this TV camera. And then started many years later my PhD project. When they asked me what do you want to write about, I was first interested in crowds. I was influenced by Elias Canetti's book Crowds and Power, Masse und Macht. And then I thought it would be also a bit complex. Then I said, why not weddings? And I started working the weddings, and I went back. I said, what was the very interesting thing about these weddings I have seen? And I remembered one day somebody told me, we are discharging ourselves from all the problems of our daily life. And we are happy to isolate ourselves in this. Just like an underground club, I thought, where peer groups, let's say, lesbian and gay people going to a lesbian gay bar, or this group of people going to another club, leather fashion, gothic fashion going to another club. It was pure fun, actually. It wasn't just a wedding, it was dancing for hours. So I was drawn into this rituals of isolation theory thanks to their account to me, because they said it. So I got my title from them.
All right. So discharging just means discharging for that very moment, or do you saw some transformative energy happening there that the people?
That's a very good
come out of
question,
that
because
differently?
I think it is essentially stuck in that 4 or 5 hours of the wedding, and the minute they walk out, the world, the fresh air of the outside, basically Germany is hitting you again in the head. It's a very nostalgic party. A lot of folkloric elements are exaggerated.
Okay.
If somebody from Turkey mainland comes here and sees these weddings, I got some friends and they were completely shocked how different it is from weddings in Turkey, for example. The music selection was different. The folk dances were so much dominating everything. And there are younger people who are born here, for example. They are more German than they're Turkish or Kurdish. But in the weddings, for some reason, 80% of the entire time of the wedding is very, very traditional set of dances, for example.
Is this what wants you to make to once you talk about rituals, or or what do you actually mean by rituals? When do you use it? Is it the folklore elements that make you want to use
Not only,
the word?
I think that would be the literal form of rituals, and the more ancient, old use of rituals, which we think all rituals must be old.
Yeah.
But I think the whole wedding is a ritual itself. The whole dancing in a club is also a ritual.
Right.
So my perception of the ritual would be the entire wedding,
Right.
I think.
What about, for example, you did some amazing work on the beauty contests in the Filipino communities in Tel Aviv. That the beauty contests that happen in the biggest bus station in Tel Aviv. Would you say this is a ritual?
Oh, massive, of course. Because then I compared that with the weddings in Germany, the energy of people discharging and remembering. First of all, there's a lot of discharge of forgetting things. It's like being high on drugs, but you're not using drugs. And for example, in weddings, there's no alcohol, in Turkish weddings here. In the beauty pageant of the Filipino guest workers in Israel, they are all guest workers working in specific field. They're nurses.
Yeah.
They are caregivers. They take care of older people. So they're all women. 90% of the population, Filipino population in Germany, in Tel Aviv, are women. And the beauty pageants are very important for them, and it is as important as weddings are important for the Turkish minority, let's say, here. So it's a very important cultural ritual. So if I compare them, they both need these rituals to remember who they are, and also to show off to the guest, the host community, who they are. it's a staging towards the outside and also towards the inside. They keep up their memories fresh, their identity fresh in a society where it's not necessarily it's easy to be a minority. Let's say in Tel Aviv, it's very difficult somehow. In Turkey, in Germany, there are also hardships. You know, the more you talk to people who are non-German, they would complain to you. But I mean, it's a general case when you're in, let's say, immigrant or immigrant background, you do have some problems. So I suddenly realized that actually they have a big relationship. They are very much in common. So I looked at the subject like that, and then I realized not only these folklore, but also religion brings people together when they are abroad. They tend to become more religious. It's a Catholic country, Philippines, and they are very devout Catholics, the only one in Asia. And Turkey is not very. Turkey is considered the most un-Muslim in the Muslim world, you know. But you know, if you're looking from a European point of view, they are actually a bit more religious, more attached to their religion than here. But also, the religious sentiments do change when you're abroad. Yeah. Not when you're traveling abroad, but when you're living abroad for a very long time. So I started seeing similarities between these groups as well, and the moment of discharge was in both of them limited to the time of the ritual, either the wedding or the beauty pageant. But of course, some people transform these, take these moments outside of the wedding hall or outside of the bus station in Tahana Merkezit in Tel Aviv. But I don't know, I haven't followed how effective it is on them in the outside world. But I know that they do it regularly, so there must be a reason why they repeat these rituals every week in weddings. And almost every 2 months there's a beauty pageant. And every Shabbat in the Jewish religious holiday, which is the ruling, let's say, religion or social conduct there in Israel, that every Saturday they must make an event. So I think they are repeating these in order to prolong this effect, as you asked, I think.
You really get into your themes through very personal connections, right? Mm-hmm. And you also often talk about intuition as a guiding force for your work. And I wonder a bit, those of us who try to be good ethnographers, they know about that, but they also know that it's difficult to argue with intuition and personal ethics, feeling your way through your research and all that. You must always try and find to argue more scientific, through more scientific ways. Can you explain a bit how you go about doing what you're doing and what intuition and perhaps emotion, how they work for you and how you can.
Now I'm contaminated because I know that there's a discussion about emotions in methodology, for example. Because I'm introduced to the academia, people grab me immediately saying that, "Oh, you're working with emotions." I said, "I didn't know."
Okay, so forget about this now. Go back to natural state one and
it's very
tell
difficult
us about
to
emotion and.
It's very difficult to say how it happened. And it's also not so good to say it just happens, you know. This is the typical artist answer, I just did it. It happened, you know. But I was probably not following trends. And I was probably not following any prescriptions of making a work which would be desirable by the audience or a special market or something. And I think I was more secretly trying to fix some bugs in my system.
What does that mean?
Those bugs could be let's say, if you look at the works, they're all about groups of people moving together and doing something together. This is for me the most essential thing of the rituals. It's done by people.
Your works.
My works are about that.
Yeah. Okay.
But if you look at me, I was brought up very, let's say, capitalist, secular, in a country where secularism against religion is super tight. You know, the discussion about laicite is very uptight. Coming from a Republican background, completely pushed back from the empire's culture, speaking of the Ottoman Empire's culture, not able to read what is written in any monument in my city because I cannot read the alphabet. And I'm taught to go away from the group and become an individual and prove myself. On top of it, I'm an artist. It's a lot about ego in this world of art. There's a lot of personal representation of yourself. So these were all my normal being. And then somehow I was more interested in what happens in a group of people where individuality is not that important. So they, I think, intuitively pushed me to that corner. But as I said, I'm now just thinking about it. I can't even really answer, I can't even remember what happened that made me decide on the day of I starting on the project. But I think it is a tool. I used it as a tool to be more curious about things I have never been told about or given. You know, because let's say the point of religion has been completely hidden from me in my upbringing. Or because I'm trained as an artist, because I'm trained as a theater guy, but because I did study something about art and the beautification of art, I was looking for the unbeautiful, the kitsch, the unorganized, the disorganized, the chaotic. For example, I'm a very disciplined person in nature, but I was interested in the completely fucked up, disorganized beauty pageants in Israel.
But they are all about beauty, aren't they? And the weddings too, staging beauty,
but
staging
they are also
harmony and love.
unbeautiful because they're all about beauty. But you look at the film, you see people; they don't look like your average beauty, which you could see in a beauty pageant. They're a bit fat here in the buttocks. They're a bit like this. I mean, they're housewives, let's say. I mean, they're like doing nursing job. And it is, I don't want to say the word ugly, but it's not beautified the way we are used to beautify. I'm contaminated by that beautification because of my field of arts, you know. So I think I was drawn into the exact opposite of what I've got used to. So individual opposite is the group. The beautification in art is opposite. And also, why am I looking at non-theatrical performances? Because I was brought up as a theater person. I was brought up as an actor. I hated it. I still hate it. So I'm looking at rituals because they are a different kind of beautification. Maybe not necessarily a beautification, but they are made for actually a special daily and spiritual need. Without them, your society will absolutely collapse. Not survive.
Right. Okay. So you look at performances that are not theatrical,
that are not artistic in this understanding of we have as an art. They are more, for example, in theater studies, there was only one theater form that I was interested in. It wasn't Shakespeare. It wasn't Chekhov. None of that. It was only ancient Greek theater, because it was folklore, because it was a religious belief. It was practice of religion. Basically, whoever says that ancient Greek theater is theater would make a wrong assumption if they just said it is a theater form. It wasn't. It was a belief. Just like you go to the mosque on a Friday or you go to the church on a Sunday. It was a part of that life, for example. So I was, I think, very interested in that. And because I hated acting, I was also interested in things that are done with bad acting. In my last project, Ashura, which is a theatrical representation of the martyrdom of Imam Hussein in the War of Karbala, they are all amateur actors acting, while the sound of the theater is coming from voiceover from a CD player, and the people are just moving their hands and their mouths. So this was an amazing open thing for me, because I've been trained so much in theater to use my voice, to do this, and it never fit me very well. I was always like saying there's something very dishonest about this, but it's a personal thing. Some actors can make it perfectly fine. But I was essentially very unhappy about fiction and fictionalizing. Okay. So maybe this is why I'm going to documentation, and maybe this is why, as again, opposites attract me. I was trained in theater, very traditional theater thing, and I was always looking, to the other side, looking for the amateurish or the kitschy, badly done, horrible costumes, but emotionally very stable. Because if an artist is if an actor is playing the role of Imam Hussein, a prophet who's killed in the war of Karbala, and the whole religion is based on his day of killing, the martyrdom of him, the elegy. They're crying, they're weeping in this play, the audience and the actors. If an actor does it, he does his job as an actor. But if an amateur person who's a Shia believer himself does this role in a very bad way, in our understanding of bad acting, I think I find this much more interesting because he's actually there more than the actor.
I wonder a little bit about being drawn to worlds opposite of those that we have come to know in our childhood and youth and our education and all that. And I wonder about what we can get to know about those worlds and what. So, for example, also in my own research, I've started to try out very different settings, doing research very far away, doing research in places that will never be mine, that I will never be close to, and I'm also trying to think about places that I'm deeply involved in, and in each place, in each setting, I can or we can learn very different things, and others will stay blind spots, and
Others will what?
Will remain blind spots. And I wonder what is, this notion that we're supposed to discuss about this notion of the de-colonizing research, like getting to the blind spots of urban research or of social processes or something like that. I wonder what are the social settings that we should look at best when we want to get to know things. So
I don't know, maybe I can ask you the question. For example, what interested me in one of your articles is that you're talking about Neukölln or your field in Berlin in general, and you got drawn into the casino culture. And this was not the topic of your talk, the real topic, but you went into that, and I know that you're interested in, let's say, groups who are not very much in the natural norm of, let's say, daily life. For example, I know that you wrote your MA thesis about prostitution, dealing with Berlin and Paris cases. And then you're looking at unsafe zones like Durban, about crime, you're dealing with that. And you're also dealing with, let's say, this issue of the casino culture. Was it intuitive for you to get involved into this subject all of a sudden in the casinos, or
I don't remember.
Was it prescribed for you, kind of, in your thinking?
I really don't remember how I got into the casino research, but I wanted to do research on my own neighborhood changing after I finished my PhD thesis on a city that I could never really understand, on Durban, South Africa, elsewhere, where I had the chance to go for research visits a lot, but I could never really share the fear that people had, that I was writing about, and that I was trying to figure out how it works, how it creates new forms of governance and of making a life in the city. So I felt there was an advantage of being a foreigner, asking around, being a researcher that is not a white South African, that is more naive, that doesn't really understand and ask. And so there are advantages for sure, but there are a lot of disadvantages of it. I will never be able to understand what certain things mean there. So I thought I want to do research on something that I can perhaps understand more, my own neighborhood changing and everybody's talking about. So I started looking into this and thought I want to bring the tools that I've got to know in my work on, like, a city in Africa, and that I encountered in context on African urbanism, Asian urbanism as well, and so I was starting to tell people that I'm working with concepts from Africa, and the reactions to this were they were strange, and they made me change my trajectory a lot, because some people said, well, that doesn't work. You can't just compare like this. And some strangely said, look, that makes a lot of sense because Neukölln is kind of the dark, like the dark side
Berlin.
of Berlin, and that almost this for many decades, the almost ghetto. And then even those who saw with me Neukölln changing, getting gentrified here and there, they were saying like, here come the hipsters. This is like new kind of colonization. So I got all those compliments for trying this out, and that made me rethink about all the stereotypes or the dangers of new stereotyping when working with concepts from elsewhere, as Jenny Robinson has said yesterday. So, and this is to come back to the casinos, and I thought, well, if I'm interested in how a neighborhood changes and debates this change constantly, if we look at Berlin, if we look at Neukölln, the only story seems to be gentrification in those last years, and I was a bit bored by that and thought, what other processes are there, what other places are there that don't seem to fit into this? And the casinos, they were like the prime place where gentrification was like, whereas finally you would find people who didn't even know what the word meant, or that were mushrooming and did not seem to be part of this taking over by young hipsters, neighborhood changing, but still they are becoming more in so I started first of all I didn't start going there, but I started going to events that would problematize the existence of casinos. So I was still very much in my old tradition of being a political scientist, which I am by training, of looking at governance, forms of regulation, forms of problematization. How is a phenomenon regulated? And so I went to events that are like about the problem of casinos in our neighborhood. And I went to talk to the Ordnungsamt people and to the police and to all sorts of people who were responsible for regulating those places. And I started getting in shadowing raids and preparation for raids and things like that. And then I found myself again in the same kind of research that I did before, going with police who tried to make the city safer, going with all sorts of regulators who tried to police prostitution thing. And then I thought, no, I must stop this regulatory view. I want to go to play. And it's not that scary. So I'm learning to become a better like an ethnographer who tries to look at the phenomenon from very different points of view and trying to see what happens when I enter those places. And of course, people tell me, well, who are you? You don't like one Bulgarian casino owner, for example. He told me later when we got to talk more. He said, "Look, when you entered that place and when you started to play where we were chatting, this was clear. You were either not some kind of inspector or some kind of spy. You were clearly too bad. You did not gamble well."
So you first started going in by playing, not
well,
telling them
I had a bit
who
of
you
change
are.
in my pockets and walked around and thought, like, €10, let's see what happens. And
so maybe let's talk about this methodology, because, I mean, not in relation to the PhD I'm doing, but I think, working with similar subjects that ethnographers are working, apparently. And I don't call myself an ethnographer and more of an artist, I think. But I've been recently talking with ethnographers, and I asked them also the question, like, how do you approach your subject? You just said that I first went in to the casino, and of course you raised some kind of suspicion. How much of that personal interaction with your subjects end up in the work, in your written work for the university?
I think I'm still trying to figure this out, but ideally this would figure in the final product a lot. And I think I wanna learn to bring those processes of learning about the subject that I'm studying, bring them more into the so-called end product, and sharing those trials and errors, or those moments of vulnerability or of ambivalence with the readers.
Did you get reaction from your, let's say, peers from the academia that these issues or these subjects are a bit too personal for the taste of academia? Do you have any obstructions?
Well, people, yeah, of course, people always have very different opinions on that, and some just find this anecdotic when people who have a more ethnographic style of reflecting what's happening in a particular situation, right? But I think that you can't do justice to all of them, and I rather want to learn to make open those very problematic moments, and of thinking what happens if you go with on a raid with people, and who you are in there, and those things, or at the end, if a person like me should do research there, and perhaps rather do work on something she understands better, and so by picking different situations, different processes, I wanna try out what I can say about different places and about the processes and changes happening.
What's more important for you? Is your research that you have shared in the whole process, that you have, a couple of years you're working on a subject, and some of it obviously will not end up in the written product. But what is more important for you to have, because now we're talking about very personal things now. Like for me, I would say the process of making the work is more important than the work that has been exhibited to people. And I usually, since many projects, I usually report first back to the community that I had the subject, I made the subject. For example, every time I exhibit the work about the Filipino beauty pageants, they know everything. Every time I submit it, I put it on Facebook, every detail, and I go in front of the screen and make screenshots of the projection. Many photographs I take because I want everybody to be in that film. They're making a catwalk, and if, for example, Marlene is not in my pictures and I put the pictures of other girls on Facebook, Marlene gets very angry with me and she starts saying something on Facebook, for example. So I report to them more, and I get really emotionally very satisfied if I keep them involved in the process before and after. Sometimes I ask them how to exhibit the work. They tell me you should have the covers of our magazines, which seems like a very kitschy idea, like to put covers of magazines published in Israel of the Filipino community. But then at the end, because they directed me to do this, it's very genuine. Right. Because I am actually. This is the question I'm going to ask. I am actually somebody, and you are also somebody from the outside, going into that community and making a work about it.
Yeah.
Okay? So whose voice is heard is very important. You are filtering the information from your own perception, your personal, and in relation to the institution that is telling you to go there. Somehow, somebody is telling you to go there, right? Yeah. University for me, museum for me, for example, institutions like this. How much do you involve your subjects in the making of your work, and do you report back to them after you write the article? For example, do they read it before it's printed?
I think you're much better at this than I so far, because I have been, I guess, since some of my interview partners in Durban, for example, police guys, security guys, city planning guys, were really proud of their work, or were quite. They liked what they were doing, and I was putting what I heard sometimes in a more critical conceptualization while I was interpreting. So. No, I haven't given them my manuscript, and I'm sure they haven't read my papers. But it's an important question, because people, when I kept going back, they were asking me, so where's your report? And
who's asking? The people that
some of them
have researched with?
Yeah, and some of them, when it became clear that I'm actually turning this thesis into a book, for example, some of the cargats I was working with or interviewing a lot.
Which guards?
The car guards are like informal guardians of cars. Like everywhere, there's informal car guards. Yeah.
Also, they're like protecting the cars of private people.
Yeah. And so really? I took them as agents of security governance and talked to them. And so one of them said, look, this is Christine and she's writing a book about me. So everybody approached me and says, you're writing a book about Joe. And I'm like, yeah, he's also appearing in my book. But so he was so looking forward to see the book and himself in it. So there's people shooting pictures of him and they send it to my email because he says that this is a better picture of himself. It should figure in the book. Yeah, this is
exactly what I'm talking about. Yeah.
But I think I have involved people less in my end product than you, and I think it's because there's so many circuits of interpretation and of involving theory and of being critical in my end product that I'm not feeling that at ease sharing this with people, either because I think...
But you're using an information they have given...
Yeah.
They gave the time and they maybe sometimes disclose a lot of personal information. I'm actually talking about a work ethics situation that I'm being asked a lot in my work. People are saying, before they ask, I told them that I'm very responsible to the community because sometimes there's a lot of abuse from the artist to a community or from the documentary filmmakers. Let's give the example of, Western journalists going to occupied Palestine, like they're just going there and going in 2 hours or 2 days and going out and making a thing out of it on the misery of some people or on some problems, but they don't live there, for example. Or many people I've talked to, I spent a lot of time in occupied Palestine, and the many people that I talk to, they always say, these internationals, these journalists. They come, they suck information, and they go. I mean, it's difficult to generalize, but they say this. So some people use the subjects, art or academia, just for the time being when they're producing that specific piece, and they forget about them later. So this is why I was asking, and I ask a lot of ethnographers, do you report back to them? Because they have given you credible information that makes you an academic or an artist.
Tell me about your practice.
I try not to hide anything from anyone, even when I'm critical to the community. I even say it out loud that I said, like, this is, what I've done. Please watch it. And of course, I'm nervous sometimes. For example, the last piece, Ashura, which was about the religious group, the Shiite minority in Turkey. After I've done the work, which is not very popular, it's traveling a lot, the first place I showed was in their community. They opened a huge screen, and I first showed it to them. And they were critical to some things, but more about shape. But I felt very, very comfortable at the end, because I never have now any question in my head when I go abroad with this film or when I do this, of no abuse. And if people ask me, how did you show this piece in Turkey? Or because a lot of questions come, people are very interested about this abuse apparently. So they say, what would the people that you shot will think about this? And I'm very comfortable in my answer because I know exactly what they think about. Of course, in arts it's easier because I have less restrictions than yours. No letter restriction, no, wording count or something. And the artist is always still the figure who can do whatever he wants or something, as long as it's inside his own, circle that he can show whatever he wants. But I think the academic can also do this. Just to send the finished product to them, just as a courtesy or a kindness. But I'm afraid I see a lot of people in arts and in academia who are using people emotionally, going deep very into them because they have testimonies and everything, and just throwing them into their scrap wastebasket. And this is a huge discussion that I do with people. I sometimes even ask the subjects, how can I edit this work? Because they are in it, and I ask them, do you want me to edit it in this way or that way? And they guide me.
That is fascinating. I think I'm doing that in earlier stages. I'm always asking people to interpret the situation they are in, to help me theorize. But until now, I haven't asked anyone to edit.
Yeah.